Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Sometimes the deepest betrayal does not come from an enemy. It comes from the person who watched you sacrifice, stood beside you for years, and still decided your loyalty was worthless. When love becomes disrespect, people can mistake quiet strength for weakness and appearances for true success. But hidden truths have a way of revealing themselves at the exact moment pride feels safest. And when that moment comes, some choices can never be taken back.
Be sure to watch till the end, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let's get started.
Take it, Vanessa said. She pulled several bills from her purse and let them fall at my feet. The money scattered across the hardwood floor, some of it sliding toward our 15-year-old son. Micah stood beside his suitcase, staring at his mother as if he was waiting for her to correct herself. She did not. Find yourself a motel, she said. My mother and Sterling are moving in tonight. Sterling Grant stood near the living room doorway, smiling. Yvette, Vanessa's mother, folded her arms. I looked at the money, then at my son. I picked up Micah's suitcase instead. My name is Dwayne Bennett. I'm 46 years old, and until that morning, I had been married to Vanessa for nearly 16 years. When we met in Richmond, Virginia, neither of us lived extravagantly. Vanessa was 28 and trying to establish herself in corporate marketing. I was 30 and told people I worked in operations and private investment. That description was true, although incomplete. I drove an ordinary sport utility vehicle, wore simple clothes, cooked most weekends, handled school runs whenever my schedule allowed, and treated home as the one place where business did not need to dominate every conversation. There had been a time when Vanessa loved that about me. During our second year together, the company she worked for eliminated her department with almost no warning. She came home carrying a cardboard box filled with framed photographs, notebooks, and a coffee mug she had received after her first promotion. She sat on the kitchen floor and cried because she believed losing that job meant she had failed. I sat beside her until nearly 2 in the morning. You did not become less valuable because somebody eliminated a position, I told her. We will get through this. She believed me then. For the next 7 months, I carried most of our household expenses while Vanessa searched for work. I helped her prepare for interviews, reviewed presentations with her at midnight, and drove her to an important interview after her car broke down the morning she was supposed to meet the hiring panel. When she finally received an offer, she wrapped her arms around me in our kitchen and said, "You carried me when I could not carry myself." I still remembered those words years later because Vanessa eventually spoke about that period as though she had survived it entirely alone. 3 years into our marriage, her mother, Yvette, needed emergency surgery. Vanessa was terrified. I rearranged my schedule, spent nights in an uncomfortable hospital chair, organized meals, handled transportation, and arranged temporary home care after Yvette was discharged. Vanessa once watched me helping her mother climb the front steps and whispered, "I will never forget what you do for this family." I missed an acquisition meeting that week, one important enough that my executive team strongly recommended I attend. I joined by telephone from Yvette's driveway instead. Vanessa never knew what that meeting was worth. At the time, it did not matter. When Micah was born, Vanessa struggled with returning to work. I shifted more of my meetings to early mornings, cooked dinner several nights a week, and turned down extended travel that would have kept me away for months at a time. Vanessa used to tell friends that I was the reason she could pursue her career without feeling that our son was being raised by strangers. One anniversary, she gave me a handwritten card that said, "Whatever success I have is partly yours because you made room for me to become myself." I kept that card on my desk for years. What Vanessa knew about my business life was limited, but I had never told her I was broke. Before we married, I told her I owned significant interests in private logistics and investment companies. We signed a prenuptial agreement after both of us had independent attorneys. The agreement clearly identified my existing business interests as separate property and stated that those interests, including future appreciation, would remain separate. Joint earnings placed into marital accounts, our jointly acquired home, and property we intentionally titled together would belong to both of us. Vanessa understood that arrangement before our wedding. What she never understood was the scale those businesses eventually reached. Years before meeting her, my Uncle Warren and I had started a small freight company using borrowed operating capital and 2 leased trucks. We nearly failed during our first 18 months. We survived because Warren understood transportation and I understood struggling companies. When he died, his estate sold his ownership interest to me at a professionally appraised value. I paid the estate, and part of those proceeds went into trusts Warren had established for his children. Then I continued building the business we had started together. Over the next 2 decades, the company expanded into freight terminals, warehousing, port logistics, renewable energy infrastructure, commercial real estate, and transportation technology. I purchased struggling businesses whose underlying operations were stronger than their financial statements suggested. Some failed despite our efforts. Others became enormous successes. The holding group eventually became Bennett Meridian Holdings. I remained controlling chairman, while professional executives handled most daily operations. Because the company was privately held and publicity brought little benefit to our business model, I rarely gave interviews and almost never appeared in promotional material. I was not invisible. Anyone conducting serious financial or corporate research could find connections between me and Bennett Meridian. But I was not a celebrity businessman whose face appeared everywhere. Most people in our social circle had no reason to investigate me. Vanessa knew I had investments in older family businesses, but because our household operated on a comfortable, ordinary budget and I refused to turn wealth into theater, she gradually decided those investments must be smaller than I had once implied. I corrected her several times when she called me unsuccessful. Eventually, she stopped asking questions and started forming conclusions. The Bennett Meridian portfolio grew to an enterprise value exceeding $50 billion. That figure represented companies, real estate, infrastructure, and investments under the group's control. It was not $50 billion sitting in my personal bank account, and I did not personally own every dollar of that value. My beneficial interests and separate. Assets still made me extraordinarily wealthy, but I had never considered the precise number useful inside my marriage. Vanessa had access to everything we had agreed would support our household. She simply did not know how much existed beyond it. My decision to live privately came partly from what money had done to people in my extended family after my grandfather died. Relationships became negotiations. Cousins who had once eaten together stopped speaking because of property. Every act of generosity became evidence in some future argument. I decided early that I would never allow my home to become a showroom for wealth. Vanessa originally agreed. She once told me, "I would rather have dinner with my husband than spend my life taking photographs of things we bought." For years, I believed we still shared that value. Her dissatisfaction arrived gradually. Friends began moving into larger homes. Women she worked with posted photographs from expensive vacations. Yvette increasingly compared our life to other people's. She would sit at our kitchen table and say, "Vanessa, you should be traveling more. You should have somebody who wants more." I finally responded one evening, "Wanting more is not the same as building something meaningful." Yvette smiled and said, "That sounds like something a man without much says to feel better." Vanessa said nothing. Her silence bothered me more than her mother's insult. Later that night, I asked Vanessa directly, "Do you believe your mother is right about me?" She avoided my eyes. "I think you are comfortable," she replied. "Sometimes too comfortable." I reminded her of the years we had built together, the career changes, Micah, the sacrifices both of us had made. She sighed. "Those are normal responsibilities, Dwayne. You act as if staying married and helping your wife makes you exceptional." The word surprised me because she had once thanked me for those same things. That was the first time I realized she had begun rewriting our marriage to support her growing resentment. I tried again several months later. I suggested counseling. Vanessa refused. "We do not need counseling," she said. "You need ambition." I almost laughed because I had spent that morning approving a 9-figure infrastructure acquisition, but telling her about it in anger would have reduced our marriage to a financial argument. Instead, I told her, I have substantial business interests. If you want to understand my work better, ask me. She shook her head. I know enough. You are always talking about investments nobody sees. I answered, that is your choice, Vanessa. It is not because I refuse to answer. Sterling Grant entered her life about 8 months before she filed for divorce. He was 47, polished, confident, and involved in commercial real estate development. He also held a real estate brokerage license, but his primary business was Grant Urban Development, a company that assembled properties and sought outside capital for redevelopment projects. Vanessa met him through a professional networking event. She mentioned him several times afterward. At first, I thought nothing of it. Then dinners became later. Her telephone remained face down. She began changing passwords. She had never cared whether I knew. One evening, our family tablet updated automatically from Vanessa's cloud account. I was looking for photographs Micah needed for a school project when a notification appeared. I did not go searching through her private messages. I did not have to. Sterling's name appeared beside a sentence that stopped me cold. Once the divorce is done, I am getting rid of that old desk in his office. Another message followed from Vanessa. Please do. He acts like sitting behind that desk made him important. Sterling replied, I will put something in there that belongs to a successful man. I should have closed the screen. Instead, I saw another message above it. Vanessa had written, he still brings up helping mom after her surgery like he saved the family. That might be the biggest achievement of his life. Sterling answered with laughing emojis and wrote, you spent 16 years applauding ordinary effort. Vanessa replied, I know. I should have left sooner. I sat there holding the same tablet Micah used for homework, remembering Vanessa crying against my chest after Yvette's surgery and telling me she would never forget what I had done. The most painful message concerned Micah. Sterling had asked, what happens with the kid when I move in? Vanessa answered, he will probably stay mostly with Dwayne. He is old enough. I cannot organize my new life around everyone else's feelings. Sterling replied, good. I do not want teenage tension every day. Vanessa wrote, neither do I. I took photographs of the messages from my attorney and then put the tablet down. I did not confront Sterling. I did not break anything. I walked outside, sat in my vehicle, and remained there until I trusted myself to speak calmly. That night, I asked Vanessa to sit with me. Are you involved with Sterling? I said. She froze for perhaps 2 seconds, then answered, yes. I asked how long. Months. I asked whether she had thought about what this would do to Micah. She said, Micah is 15. Children survive divorces every day. I told her surviving something is not the same as being unharmed by it. She looked exhausted rather than ashamed. I have made my decision, Dwayne. I want a different life. I asked, even after everything we built? She replied, I think I gave those years too much importance. She had opportunities to stop. I offered counseling again. She refused. I asked her not to bring Sterling into our home while we were still married. She brought him there anyway. I asked her to consider waiting until we had spoken with Micah together before making public announcements. She posted a photograph with Sterling first. Yvette encouraged every step. You finally chose yourself, she told Vanessa within my hearing. Vanessa was not manipulated into betraying me. Her mother reinforced what she wanted to believe, and Sterling presented an attractive fantasy. But Vanessa repeatedly chose the affair, the disrespect, and the speed of the divorce. The divorce was handled in Virginia. Our prenuptial agreement became central immediately. My attorney, Patrice Holloway, provided the required financial material through the formal process. Bennett Meridian's lawyers also produced confidential documentation establishing my separate ownership interests in the governing trust and holding company structures. Vanessa's attorney warned her that my separate estate appeared far larger than the lifestyle we had maintained and recommended additional financial review. Vanessa declined to spend months challenging an agreement she had signed with independent counsel nearly 16 years earlier, especially after her own lawyer found no evidence that I had hidden marital assets. That point mattered. Vanessa was not denied access to legal advice. She was not tricked into believing I literally owned nothing. She knew I possessed significant separate holdings. She simply believed the practical value was irrelevant to her because the prenuptial agreement protected them, and because Sterling kept telling her that old private companies were not the same thing as visible success. She wanted the house, her share of our joint savings and investments, her retirement accounts, and a fast ending. I agreed to a reasonable settlement. Neither of us sought spousal support under the terms we had already negotiated years earlier. Micah was the part one refused to treat casually. By agreement, I became his primary residential parent, while Vanessa retained regular parenting time and shared decision-making rights. Micah was old enough that his preference carried practical weight, and he told both attorneys he wanted to live primarily with me. Vanessa agreed because, as she told the mediator, her new circumstances required flexibility. When I heard that wording, I remembered the message she had sent Sterling about not organizing her life around everyone else's feelings. I said nothing. Micah had already heard enough arguments. On the morning after the divorce decree became final, I returned to the house to remove the last of my belongings. The settlement transferred Vanessa my interest in the marital home in exchange for other agreed property. She owned it now. I intended to collect clothes, personal records, photographs, and a few items from my office. Instead, I found Sterling there with boxes. Yvette had a suitcase in the hallway. Vanessa told me they were both moving in immediately. Then she told Micah that if he could not accept the new household arrangement during his visits, he could simply stay with me. Micah looked at her. "Are you telling me not to come here anymore?" he asked. Vanessa frowned. "Do not twist what I said." He replied, "Then tell me what you mean." She looked towards Sterling before answering, and that small movement told Micah more than the words that followed. "I mean, you have your father," she said. "Nobody is abandoning you." Micah's face changed. He did not cry. He simply became still. I had seen that expression only once before, when a close friend moved away without telling him. It was the look of someone discovering that another person had already made peace with losing them. Then Vanessa opened her purse. She counted several bills and held them toward me. "Take it," she said. I did not move. She let the money fall. Several $100s scattered between us. "At least get yourself a motel until you figure out what you're doing." Sterling laughed quietly. Yvette said, "Do not become proud now, Dwayne. You probably need it." Micah stared at his mother. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. Vanessa replied, "Because your father needs to understand that choices have consequences." I looked at her for a long moment. In my pocket was a telephone capable of connecting me within seconds to people who managed assets worth more than everyone in that room could imagine. I could have opened a banking application. I could have named companies. I could have told Sterling exactly who owned several properties his firm had once tried to approach. I could have turned the hallway into a contest and won it easily. Instead, I picked up Micah's suitcase. "Come on, son," I said. That was all. As we reached the door, Vanessa raised her voice. "This is exactly why I left you. You never became anything." I stopped, not because I believed her, but because 16 years deserved one final second of acknowledgement. Then I kept walking. Micah followed. Near the doorway, he bent down and picked up one $100 bill from the floor. He folded it once and placed it in his pocket. I saw him do it, but did not ask why. Later he told me he wanted proof that nobody could soften that morning into something different. We moved into a furnished two-bedroom apartment in Richmond while I arranged a longer-term home. It was comfortable but ordinary. That evening, Micah sat across from me eating pasta and asked, "Are we actually okay?" I understood what he meant. I refused to turn uncertainty into some lesson designed to test my son. "Yes," I said, "we are financially secure, more secure than you realize. You are not going to lose your school, your future, or anything you need." He studied my face. "Then why did Mom think we needed motel money?" I replied, "Because your mother does not know everything about my work." I told him I would explain fully soon. "I'm not keeping you frightened to prove anything," I said. "I simply want to show you properly, because the truth is larger than a number." Micah nodded, although he was clearly curious. For the first few days, we focused on practical things. I drove him to school. We moved his computer into the apartment. His basketball shoes disappeared beneath the couch. Normal life began reclaiming space. Vanessa called twice. Micah answered both times, but the conversations were short. I never told him to ignore her. Meanwhile, the financial support that legally ended with our marriage ended. Vanessa and now own the house, so the property taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities, and service contract attached to it became her responsibility. Nothing was secretly canceled to punish her. Those obligations had been listed in the settlement materials. I removed myself from accounts I was no longer responsible for and maintained everything required for Micah. The house was valuable, and Vanessa had substantial assets after the divorce. She was not destitute. She simply discovered that maintaining the life we had shared cost more than she had noticed while responsibilities were divided between us. About 2 weeks later, I brought Micah to Bennett Meridian's headquarters in downtown Richmond. I did not arrange a parade. The security officer recognized me and greeted me by name. A receptionist smiled and said, "Good morning, Mr. Bennett." When we reached the executive floor, my assistant came out to meet us. Micah noticed people acknowledging me naturally, not theatrically. Then he saw the company name on the glass wall outside the boardroom, Bennett Meridian Holdings. He stopped walking. "Bennett?" he asked. I said, "Yes." His eyes moved from the sign back to me. Inside my office, I told him the full history. I explained Uncle Warren, the freight company, the acquisitions, the holding structures, and the prenuptial agreement. I explained that the portfolio controlled by Bennett Meridian was valued at more than $50 billion, but that enterprise value was not the same thing as cash or personal net worth. I explained that my personal interests still meant neither he nor I would ever need motel money unless we chose to stay in one. Micah stared at me for several seconds. Then he asked the question I knew he would ask. "Why did you let her do that to you?" "Because stopping her with money would not have changed what she believed about me," I replied. "If somebody respects me only after seeing a balance sheet, then the balance sheet bought attention, not respect." Micah looked down at his hands. "Does Mom know any of this?" he asked. I said, "She knew I owned businesses. Her lawyer knew there were significant separate assets. She never knew the scale because she never wanted to understand it." He shook his head slowly. "She thought Sterling was richer than you." I answered, "Your mother made a decision based on many things. Let her own her decision." What I did not know when I first brought Micah to headquarters was how close Sterling already was to Bennett Meridian. Several months earlier, Grand Urban Development had submitted a proposal to a private real estate fund managed by one of our subsidiaries. Sterling wanted financing for a mixed-use logistics and commercial development near Norfolk. The proposal had moved through normal channels without ever reaching me personally. By the time it reached final due diligence, my investment team had already spent weeks reviewing financial statements, property records, projected leases, debt schedules, and proposed collateral. Sterling believed the financing would transform his company. He told Vanessa the closing was almost guaranteed. By then, she had invested part of the liquid assets she received in the divorce into his project. Sterling described the money as equity needed for deposits, engineering work, legal fees, and early development costs. Vanessa also agreed to become a limited guarantor on part of a bridge facility because Sterling told her the guarantee would disappear when permanent financing closed. That role explained why she later attended the final financing meeting. She was no longer merely his romantic partner. On paper, she had become an investor. Weeks after the divorce, one of my investment officers sent me the final committee package. I recognized Sterling's name immediately. I did not call him. I did not ask anyone to alter the review. I contacted our general counsel, Harold Gaines, and disclosed my personal connection. "The applicant is involved with my former wife," I said. Harold answered, "Then you should not participate in the approval decision." I agreed. The independent investment committee would make the final decision. I could attend the opening because of the transaction size and because senior management routinely attended such presentations, but I would not vote or direct the outcome. The due diligence became more serious before the meeting. Sterling's company had reported projected revenues supported by letters of intent that analysts could not fully verify. A property listed as unencumbered collateral already carried a recorded lien. Another asset appeared in financing documents submitted to two separate lenders. Sterling had also failed to disclose several short-term debts tied to earlier developments. None of those issues concerned Vanessa personally. They concerned whether Bennett Meridian could trust the information Grant Urban Development had supplied while requesting a large amount of capital. Then the accountants found something worse. Vanessa's money had entered a Grant Urban Development operating account that Sterling had identified as the project account. Bank statements he submitted during diligence showed transfers from that account to creditors connected to older projects. Money Vanessa believed was paying engineers, deposits, and development expenses had instead been used partly to service unrelated obligations. Because Vanessa was identified in the financing documents as an investor and proposed guarantor, our counsel requested clarification through Grant's attorneys. Sterling responded with explanations that did not reconcile with the records. Harold advised that the suspicious records be preserved and that the financial institutions involved might need to evaluate their own reporting obligations. Bennett Meridian was not a police agency, and I had no intention of pretending otherwise. Our job was simple: protect our investors, refuse financing based on unreliable submissions, preserve relevant documentation, and let counsel determine what information could legally be shared with affected institutions. I told the committee, treat this file exactly as you would if I had never heard Sterling Grant's name. Celeste Morgan, who chaired the Independent Investment Committee, replied, that is already how we are treating it. On the morning of the final presentation, Sterling arrived in a tailored suit with Vanessa beside him. I later learned from her that he had spent the entire drive telling her they were hours away from changing their lives. He believed Bennett Meridian's fund would supply the capital he needed, validate his project to other investors, and free him from expensive short-term debt. Vanessa believed the same. She wore the expression of someone preparing to witness proof that every painful decision she had made had finally produced the future she expected. I entered the conference room with Harold and our chief financial officer. Celeste and the committee members were already seated. Sterling stood politely. Vanessa looked toward the door, saw me, and stopped breathing for what seemed like several seconds. My assistant said, Chairman Bennett, the committee is ready. Vanessa whispered, Dwayne. Sterling turned toward her, then back toward me. I took my seat briefly at the head of the table for introductions. There was no screen announcing my personal fortune. There did not need to be. The company name, the room, and the way everyone addressed me were enough. Vanessa stared at me. You are the chairman? She asked before Sterling could stop her. I answered, I am. She looked through the glass toward the Bennett Meridian name on the wall. This is yours? She asked. I control the holding group, I replied. The investment committee controls today's financing decision. Then I looked at Sterling. Before we proceed, I need to disclose that I have a personal conflict involving Mr. Grant and one of his investors. I will not participate in the committee's decision. Sterling's confidence finally changed. Celeste conducted the meeting. Sterling presented market forecasts, property plans, projected tenants, and financing needs. He was prepared. That mattered because I did not want him reduced to a fool simply to make the revelation dramatic. He understood development and could speak convincingly about the project. His problem was not incompetence. His problem was that the numbers beneath his presentation could not withstand scrutiny. Celeste asked about undisclosed debt. Sterling called it temporary financing. Harold asked about conflicting liens. Sterling blamed paperwork delays. The chief financial officer asked about the transfers from the project account. Sterling's answer became less confident. Those were internal cash management decisions, he said. Celeste replied, they were transfers to creditors associated with unrelated ventures. Vanessa turned toward him. What creditors? She asked. Sterling said quietly, Vanessa, let me finish. Celeste looked at her. Ms. Bennett, because you are identified as an investor and proposed guarantor, counsel will provide the information relevant to your position through the appropriate process. We are not going to discuss your private finances beyond what is necessary in this room. That professional restraint made the truth more frightening, not less. I said very little. The committee recessed. I left before deliberations began. 25 minutes later, Celeste informed Sterling that the transaction had been rejected because of material inconsistencies in financial representations, undisclosed debt, collateral conflicts, and unacceptable use of project funds. The rejection would have happened whether Sterling had been a stranger or my closest friend. When I returned after the decision, Vanessa was still seated. Sterling was gathering his documents. She looked at me and said, "You knew he was using my money?" I replied, "I learned through due diligence. Your attorney needs to speak with our counsel." Sterling said, "This is personal." I looked at him. I recused myself from the decision. Celeste added, "Mr. Grant, the committee's reasons are documented and independent of Chairman Bennett's personal relationship to anyone involved." Sterling had nothing useful to say after that. Vanessa looked at me again, but this time the shock in her face had changed. Discovering who I was had hurt her pride. Discovering what Sterling had done frightened her. The man she had chosen because she believed he represented financial security had been quietly depending on her money to hold together obligations he had concealed. The collapse did not happen in a single afternoon. Sterling still had rights, contracts, lawyers, creditors, and explanations. But the failed financing exposed pressure that his company could no longer hide. One lender discovered that collateral supporting its loan was also connected to another financing arrangement and issued a default notice under its loan covenants. Another creditor filed a civil action seeking repayment. Investors from an older project began asking questions after Grant Urban Development missed scheduled payments. Bennett Meridian's general counsel provided records where legally required and otherwise stayed out of matters that did not belong to us. Vanessa hired her own attorney and a forensic accountant. That was how she learned the full extent of Sterling's betrayal. Some of her money had funded legitimate project expenses, but a substantial portion had been transferred toward older debts and expenses she had never agreed to cover. She filed a civil claim seeking recovery and challenged obligations she believed Sterling had induced her to guarantee through material misrepresentation. Her attorney also submitted a complaint to the state licensing authority because Sterling's conduct involved transactions connected to his licensed real estate activities. I had no role in deciding what those agencies did next. The licensing inquiry did not produce an instant dramatic punishment. Investigators requested documents and began reviewing the conduct. That was enough. Sterling's reputation suffered because lenders and partners became reluctant to trust his disclosures while civil disputes were active. His company lost access to easy credit. He sold interests in 2 smaller projects. Eventually, he moved out of Vanessa's house. There was no grand confrontation. He simply took more of his belongings each week until almost nothing remained. Vanessa later admitted that she kept believing his next explanation because accepting the truth meant admitting what she had traded away. Yvette's response was quieter and, in some ways, crueler. She had spent years telling Vanessa that she deserved a richer, more impressive man. Once Sterling's problems became undeniable, Yvette stopped speaking with the same certainty. First she said, "Nobody could have known." Then she said, "I only wanted you to be happy." When Vanessa reminded her how strongly she had encouraged the relationship, Yvette replied, "You were an adult. I never told you to destroy your marriage." Within weeks, she moved out of the guest room and returned to her own home, claiming Vanessa needed space. Vanessa later told me that sentence from her mother hurt because it was partly true. Yvette had encouraged her, but Vanessa had made the decisions. Nobody forced her to have an affair. Nobody forced her to mock the sacrifices she had once appreciated. Nobody forced her to allow Sterling into our home before the divorce was complete. Nobody forced her to dismiss Micah as flexible enough to absorb whatever she wanted. And nobody forced her to throw money at me. Influence explained some of her thinking. It did not remove responsibility. Micah learned about Sterling's financial problems through Vanessa, not me. One evening after she called him, he sat on the edge of the couch and said, "Mom says Sterling lied to her." I answered, "It appears he did." Micah asked, "Do you feel happy about that?" I thought before answering. No, his problems do not repair what happened to us. Micah looked relieved. He had been watching me carefully ever since the divorce, measuring what kind of man I would become. now that he knew how much power I actually possessed. I wanted him to see restraint without pretending anger had never existed. Vanessa stared at the bill without touching it. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I know," I replied. Her tears fell quietly now. I did not enjoy them. I did not feel victorious. I only felt the finality of something I had spent nearly 16 years protecting. Vanessa stood after a while. At the door, she turned toward me and said, "I thought I was leaving a man who could not give me enough." I said nothing. She looked back at the folded bill. I did not understand what I was actually losing. Then she left. I left the money where it was until Micah came home. He saw it on the table and asked, "She came?" I nodded. "Did she take it?" he asked. "No." He stood quietly for a moment, then picked up the bill himself. "I do not want it anymore," he said. "What should we do with it?" I answered, "Whatever you want." He thought about that, unfolded it carefully, and slipped it into an envelope he kept for school donations. That was the first time I saw the memory loosen its grip on him without anyone pretending it had never happened. I began showing Micah more of my work, but slowly. He visited the headquarters during school breaks, and sometimes sat quietly through meetings that were appropriate for him to hear. I explained why companies failed, why debt mattered, why numbers could look impressive while hiding weak foundations, and why people deserve to be treated carefully whether they controlled $10 or 10 million. I never told him Bennett Meridian would someday be his. He was 15. His life belonged to him. If he wanted another career, I would support it. One Saturday morning, several months after Vanessa's visit, Micah came with me to the headquarters because I needed to review a new logistics proposal. We stepped out of the elevator, and the receptionist greeted him by name. He no longer stared at the company logo in disbelief. He still noticed it, but now he understood that the name on the wall represented work, responsibility, people's salaries, contracts, risks, and decisions rather than a magical number that had suddenly changed who his father was. Before I entered the conference room, Micah stopped me. "Dad," he said, "when you and Uncle Warren started the first company, how many trucks did you actually have?" I smiled. 2 leased trucks and more debt than confidence. He laughed. "Can you show me how you turned that into all this?" I opened the conference room door. "Only if you actually want to learn." He looked through the doorway at the table, the reports, and the people beginning another ordinary morning of work. "I do," he said. I rested my hand briefly on his shoulder, the same way I had when we walked out of the house months earlier. Back then, Vanessa's money had been scattered across the floor behind us. Sterling had been laughing, and Micah had been carrying a suitcase because his mother had chosen a future that did not seem to have room for him. Now there was no audience waiting for some final speech, and no person left for me to prove wrong. There was only my son standing beside me, asking where the work had begun. "Then we start with the first truck," I said. Micah walked into the room ahead of me, carrying nothing from that hallway except what he had chosen to learn from it. I followed him inside and closed the door behind us. If you enjoyed the story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.